If they found out about the child, they wouldn't just take it away, they would erase it like it was never meant to exist. That was the first truth I learned the night everything fell apart, and the only reason I survived long enough to run. My name is Elias Rowan, and I have always known exactly what I am. A low-grade Omega. Not rare. Not valuable. Not the kind anyone would fight for. I was taken into the Ashford household when I was 8, raised under the same roof as polished marble floors and unspoken rules, taught how to exist quietly in a world that was never meant for someone like me. I learned early on that I was tolerated, not accepted, allowed, not chosen. And yet, I grew up beside him. Adrian Ashford, the heir, the alpha everyone expected to inherit everything without question. We shared the same mornings, the same hallways, the same long years that blurred together into something almost resembling a life. And somewhere along the way, I made the mistake of believing that I meant something to him. It wasn't obvious. It was never something he said out loud, but it was there in the details. The way he always stood just a little closer to me than necessary. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way no one else was ever allowed to treat me like I was beneath them, except his family. I told myself it meant something. I told myself I was different, that I mattered. I was wrong. The night they found out about us, the entire house shifted. It didn't explode. It didn't turn chaotic. It simply tightened, like everything had already been decided before I walked into that room. "You've forgotten your place," his mother said, her voice calm, controlled, precise. The kind of calm that didn't need to be loud to be absolute. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I hadn't forgotten. I had just chosen to ignore it. "The engagement will proceed," his father added, barely glancing in my direction, as if I had already stopped existing in the conversation. "Miss Calloway's family expects the announcement within the week." Lillian Calloway. Perfect on paper. Perfect in status. Perfect in every way that mattered to them. Everything I was not. But even then, even with all of that, I still looked at him. I waited. I didn't need him to argue. I didn't need him to fight them. I just needed something. A word. A step forward. Anything that would tell me I hadn't imagined everything between us. His hands were clenched so tightly at his sides that the tension was visible even from where I stood. I saw it. I noticed every detail about him, the way I always had. And for a second, just a second, I thought he was going to say something. His lips parted slightly. His weight shifted forward. But then the man standing just behind him took a single step closer, subtle enough that no one else would have noticed. Adrian did. And just like that, he stopped. He didn't speak. Not for me. Not against them. Not at all. And in that silence, everything inside me collapsed without making a sound. I understood. Completely. I was alone. I left before they could dismiss me. Before I could see the exact moment he chose them. Because I knew he would. I told myself it would hurt less if I walked away first. That if I didn't stay long enough to hear it, I could pretend it didn't matter. But the pain didn't come all at once. It settled. Quiet. Constant. Like something lodged beneath my ribs that refused to leave. And then it got worse. I stared at the test in my hand, my fingers trembling despite how tightly I held on to it. 2 lines. Clear. Unavoidable. A life. His life. Our child. The world didn't stop. It didn't shift. It just kept going, as if nothing had changed at all. But everything had. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to breathe around the weight of it, trying to understand how something so small could alter the direction of my entire life. Maybe this would change things. That was my second mistake. I went back. Not to the house. I would never be allowed near it again. But to him. I waited in the one place I knew he would pass, just outside the business district, where the city softened enough to make it feel like the world might pause for a moment. He came. Of course he did. He always did. For a second, everything felt the same. The way his eyes found me immediately. The way his steps slowed, just slightly. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were men behind him. Not close enough to interfere. Not obvious enough to draw attention. But present. Watching. Measuring. And suddenly, I understood something I hadn't before. This was no longer just about us. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, controlled, distant in a way that made something in my chest tighten. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say it, about the child, about everything, but the words wouldn't come. Because I remembered what I had overheard the night before. If the Omega becomes a problem, remove it. And if there's a child, then it won't be allowed to exist. My hand moved instinctively, resting lightly over my stomach. Protective. Immediate. He noticed. Of course he did. His gaze dropped for just a second, and something flashed there. Sharp, intense, almost like fear. Hope surged through me before I could stop it. I need to talk to you, I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. Too long. Like he was calculating something I couldn't see. Then one of the men behind him shifted slightly. Adrian's jaw tightened. And then he stepped back. Just half a step. But it was enough. There's nothing to talk about, he said. Clean. Final. Controlled. Like a door closing. Something inside me went completely still. Not shattered. Not broken. Just empty. Because in that moment, I finally understood what he had chosen. It wasn't me. It was never going to be me. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I could feel anything anymore. I understand, I said, my voice steady in a way that didn't belong to me. I turned before I could hesitate, before I could beg, before I could lose the last piece of myself I still had left. And this time, he didn't come after me. Not when I walked away. Not when I left the city. Not even when I disappeared completely. So I made a choice. If staying meant losing this child, then I would disappear first. I would leave before they could find me. Before they could take the only thing in this world that was truly mine. I won't let them touch you. I whispered that night, my hand resting gently over the life I refused to give up. And for the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for Adrian Ashford to choose me, and chose the only thing they couldn't take away instead. The second night on the street, I realized hunger wasn't just an empty feeling. It was something that hollowed you out slowly, patiently, until even your thoughts felt thinner than they used to be. I hadn't eaten since the morning before, and even that had been barely enough to count. By the time the sun dipped below the buildings, my steps were unsteady, my vision slightly blurred at the edges, and every breath felt like it took more effort than it should. I stopped in front of a small convenience store without meaning to, my body drawn there by something instinctive. The glass reflected me back in a way I didn't recognize. Paler, thinner, eyes too tired for someone who used to sleep in a bed softer than anything this city could offer. Inside, the shelves were full. Bread, packaged meals, warm lights spilling over everything like it was effortless to exist in that world. I stared longer than I should have. I remembered, suddenly and without warning, the way meals used to appear in front of me without question. The way I never had to think about whether I would eat or not. The way Adrian would sometimes pause before leaving the table, his gaze flicking toward me, subtle but certain, making sure I had enough before he walked away. I hadn't noticed how much that mattered until it was gone. Hey, the voice snapped me back. You buying something or just standing there? I blinked, forcing myself to look away. I'm sorry, I said quickly, stepping back. I was just looking. Then look somewhere else, the man said flatly. You're blocking customers. I nodded, even though there was no one behind me, and stepped outside again. The cold hit harder this time. Or maybe I was just weaker. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold in what little warmth I had left, but it didn't stop the ache twisting deeper in my stomach. It wasn't just hunger. It was something sharper, more insistent. It's okay, I murmured, my hand pressing lightly against my abdomen. Just a little longer. The nausea came suddenly. It always did, but tonight it felt worse, stronger, faster, like my body had reached a point where it refused to cooperate anymore. I barely made it to the side of the alley before I doubled over, one hand braced against the wall as my body convulsed violently. There was nothing in my stomach, nothing left to give, but it didn't matter. It kept trying anyway. My throat burned, my chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was breathing or not. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers trembling against the rough surface of the wall, and for a split second, something else surfaced, something warm, something steady. A memory. Adrian's hand resting lightly against my back, firm but careful, his voice low and controlled as he told me to slow down, to breathe properly, to not rush through something my body wasn't ready for. You don't have to push yourself, he had said once, his tone softer than anyone else had ever heard from him. I'll wait. The memory shattered as another wave hit, dragging me back to the present where there was no one there to steady me. When it finally stopped, I stayed where I was, my forehead pressed against the cold brick, my body shaking in a way I couldn't fully control. Everything felt off, unbalanced, like something essential had been removed, and my body didn't know how to function without it. And I knew why. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew. It was him. Or more precisely, the absence of him. Adrian's pheromones had always been subtle, controlled, never overwhelming, but they had been there. Constant, quiet, A presence I had grown used to without realizing how much it anchored me. Without it, everything inside me felt wrong. My instincts were louder, my body more sensitive, the nausea more violent. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the loss of something I had never thought I depended on. I slid down slowly until I was sitting on the ground, my hand instinctively resting over my stomach again. I know. I whispered, my voice uneven but softer now. I know we'll get through this. I didn't know if I was trying to comfort myself or the life inside me. Maybe both. Footsteps passed at the end of the alley. Someone glanced in briefly, their eyes flicking over me before looking away just as quickly. No one stopped. No one asked. I wasn't someone worth noticing. The third night was colder. I found a narrow space beneath a set of stairs behind a closed building, just enough to block the wind if I curled in tightly. The ground was hard, uneven, and smelled faintly of damp concrete, but it was better than nothing. I pulled my coat closer, trying to trap what little warmth I had left, my body already trembling despite the effort. Sleep didn't come easily. It never did anymore. Every sound made me tense. Every shift in the air felt like something I needed to be aware of. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under anyway. And just as quickly, I was pulled back out. Hey, you can't stay here. The voice was firm, not loud but enough to cut through the haze in my head. I opened my eyes slowly, my body heavy as I tried to sit up. A security guard stood a few steps away, watching me with a mixture of irritation and something else I couldn't quite place. This area is private, he said. You need to move. I nodded, pushing myself up even as the world tilted slightly around me. I'm sorry, I said automatically. I'll leave. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze dropping briefly to where my hand had settled again, protective without thinking. Something in his expression shifted, softer for just a second, but it didn't last. Just don't come back here, he said, stepping aside. Next time I'll have to report it. I understand. And just like that, I was outside again. Again and again. That was how it went. No place to stay. No place to rest. Just movement. Because stopping meant being found. And being found meant losing everything. By the end of the week, even standing felt like too much. My body was exhausted in a way that went deeper than simple fatigue. The nausea came more often. The hunger never left. And the absence, that quiet, constant absence, pressed in on me from every direction. There were moments, brief and dangerous, when I thought about going back. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. I would close my eyes and remember him. The way he had always noticed things before I said them. The way he would adjust the temperature in a room without being asked when he saw me shiver. The way he would leave things within reach for me. Small, quiet gestures that no one else ever seemed to notice. My body remembered him even when my heart tried not to. And I hated that. I hated that even now, after everything, some part of me still reached for something that had already been taken away. My steps slowed one evening, my vision darkening slightly at the edges as the weakness caught up with me all at once. For a second, I wasn't sure I could keep standing. My hand shot out, catching the edge of a wall just before my knees gave out completely. I stayed there, breathing unevenly, my grip tightening as I forced myself to stay upright. Not here, I whispered under my breath. Not like this. I couldn't afford to fall. Not now. Not ever. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself back up, my hand trembling as it returned to rest over my stomach. Grounding. Always grounding. He's not coming, I said quietly, the words finally settling into something real, something I couldn't avoid anymore. Saying it out loud made it final in a way nothing else had. My fingers curled slightly against the fabric of my coat. So we don't wait, I added, my voice steadier now despite everything. We survive. The city moved on around me, indifferent as ever. But this time, something inside me didn't feel as fragile as before. Because no matter how hard this became, I had already chosen. And I would endure whatever it took to protect the only thing in this world that was truly mine. By the time the second week ended, I had stopped counting days and started measuring everything in how long I could keep going before my body gave out. Work, hunger, nausea, sleep. If it could even be called that. Everything blurred together into something relentless and unyielding. I didn't wait for help. I couldn't afford to. If I wanted somewhere to sleep, I worked for it. If I wanted food, I earned it, even when my hands shook and my vision refused to stay steady. The bakery wasn't the first place that gave me a chance, but it was the first place that didn't feel temporary. I still remember the moment I almost collapsed in front of it. The world had already been dimming at the edges, my steps slower than they should have been, my body heavier than I could control. I had just finished hauling a crate for a delivery job, barely paid, barely worth the effort, when everything tilted all at once. My hand shot out, catching the wall before I hit the ground, but it wasn't enough to steady me completely. For a second, I wasn't sure I could get back up. Not here, I whispered under my breath, forcing my legs to lock, forcing myself to stay upright even as my body protested. I couldn't fall, not in the open, not where anyone could notice. Hey, the voice cut through the haze, calm and grounded in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. I turned slightly, my vision still blurred, and saw him, standing just outside the bakery, watching me like he had already decided something. A beta, late 20s, maybe, clean, composed, with a quiet steadiness that didn't push but didn't step back either. You're going to pass out, he said, not accusing, not dramatic, just stating a fact. I'm fine, I answered automatically, even as my fingers tightened against the wall to keep myself from slipping. He didn't argue. He just walked closer, stopping at a distance that didn't feel threatening. You're not, he said gently, and you don't have to prove anything to me. Something in that sentence caught me off guard. Not the words themselves, but the way he said them. Like he meant it. Like he wasn't expecting anything from me in return. I don't have money, I said quietly, because that was the only thing that mattered in situations like this. He exhaled softly, almost like he had expected that answer. Good, he said, because I'm not asking for it. I blinked, confused despite myself. He gestured slightly behind him. I run that place. You can sit inside for a bit. No one's going to chase you out. I followed his gaze to the bakery, warm lights spilling through the windows, the faint scent of fresh bread drifting into the cold air. My stomach tightened instantly, a sharp reminder of everything I had been trying to ignore. Hunger, weakness, need. I swallowed hard. I won't stay long, I said. You can stay as long as you need, he replied simply. That was the moment something shifted. Not everything. Not enough to call it hope, but enough that I didn't walk away. Inside, the warmth hit me first. Soft, immediate, so different from the cold air I had been breathing for days that it almost felt unreal. I sat where he told me. My body sinking into the chair before I could stop it, the tension in my muscles loosening just slightly. He placed a glass of water in front of me, followed by something small and warm wrapped in paper. Slow, he said, or your body's going to reject it. I nodded, my fingers tightening slightly before I reached for it. The first bite was enough to make my chest ache unexpectedly. Not from pain. From memory. Adrian used to notice things like this before I even said them. The way my appetite shifted. The way my body reacted to certain things. He never made a big deal out of it. He just adjusted quietly, like it was natural to take care of something that didn't belong to him. You're thinking too much, the beta said lightly, breaking through the memory. I blinked, looking up at him. Sorry. Don't apologize for eating, he replied, leaning casually against the counter. That's the one thing you should be doing more of. I let out a small breath that almost felt like a laugh, though it didn't quite reach that point. Elias, I said after a moment. That's my name. Daniel, he replied. He didn't ask anything else. Didn't question where I came from or why I looked like I hadn't slept properly in days. And somehow, that made it easier to stay. I didn't stop working outside immediately. I couldn't. Stability wasn't something I trusted yet. So I kept taking small jobs when I could, lifting, cleaning, carrying, anything that brought in a little extra money, even as my body struggled to keep up. But the bakery became something different. A place I returned to. A place that didn't disappear the next day. Daniel let me stay in the small storage room behind the shop at night, a narrow space with a worn couch and a blanket that carried the faint scent of flour and something clean. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and steady was something I hadn't had in a long time. I started helping more. Cleaning trays, wiping counters, organizing supplies. Small tasks at first, but enough to make myself useful. Enough to justify staying. It wasn't easy. The nausea didn't go away. Some mornings, it hit so hard I had to grip the back door just to stay upright, my entire body shaking as I fought through it. There were days when I had to stop in the middle of a task, closing my eyes just to steady the dizziness long enough to keep going. You're pushing too hard, Daniel said once, watching me carefully as I tried to lift a tray that was clearly too heavy for me in that moment. I'm fine, I replied automatically. He didn't move, didn't take it from me. He just stood there, waiting, not forcing, not insisting, just present. After a few seconds, I exhaled and set the tray down. 5 minutes, he said. Then you can go back to pretending you're invincible. I nodded, sitting down because I knew he was right. Because this time, I didn't have to prove I could endure everything alone. Days passed. Slowly, something began to change. Not everything. The exhaustion still lingered. The hunger never fully disappeared. But the nausea shifted. It wasn't as overwhelming. Not as constant. One evening, after closing, Daniel placed a small bottle in front of me. Take one, he said. I looked at it, uncertain. What is it? Something that might help, he replied. You don't have to take it. But I think you should. I hesitated, my fingers brushing lightly against the bottle. There was something about it, subtle, almost familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Like a scent just beyond recognition. It's safe, he added quietly. I wouldn't give it to you if it wasn't. I nodded slowly, taking one. The effect wasn't immediate. But the next morning, when the nausea came, it didn't hit as hard. The edge was dulled, the dizziness less severe. Enough that I could breathe through it without collapsing. It's working, I said later that day, my voice quieter than I intended. Daniel nodded once, like he had expected that. Good. I didn't ask where it came from. Didn't question why it helped in a way nothing else had. I just accepted it. Because for the first time since I left, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to stand on my own. And even though I didn't realize it yet, something else had already begun to move quietly behind the scenes, shaping a path I thought I had built entirely by myself. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. That thought came quietly, almost unnoticed, as the morning light slipped through the bakery windows and settled across the counter where I stood, hands dusted with flour, shaping dough with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. The shop was still closed, the city outside only beginning to wake, and for a moment, everything felt still, peaceful. You're here early again. Daniel's voice came from behind me, low and calm as always. I didn't turn right away. Couldn't sleep. That wasn't entirely true. I could sleep now. Not deeply. Not without dreams. But enough. Enough that I didn't wake up panicked, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. He stepped closer, setting a paper bag down on the counter beside me. Then at least eat something. I glanced at it. I'll eat later. You said that yesterday. I exhaled softly. I'm fine. There was a pause. Then, simply, you're not. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because something in his tone made it pointless. I wiped my hands and reached for the bag, taking a small bite just to end the conversation. He didn't push further. He never did. That was one of the things I had started to notice about Daniel. He helped, but never forced. Stayed, but never intruded. Watched, but never judged. It was unfamiliar. And somehow, that made it easier to breathe. Work started like any other day. Orders, preparation, the steady rhythm of baking that had slowly become second nature again. At first, I had only followed what Daniel showed me. Then I began adjusting small things. Now, I was creating. You changed this again, Daniel said later that morning, holding up one of the pastries I had just finished. I hesitated for a second. Just a little. He took a bite, chewing slowly, his expression unreadable as always. Then he reached for another piece. It's better, he said. Not praise. Not exaggerated. Just truth. Something in my chest tightened slightly. Not painfully. Just enough to remind me that I still wasn't used to hearing that. I just remember what works, I said quietly. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. No, he replied. You understand what works. I didn't respond, but his words stayed. The shop grew busier as the days passed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just steadily. Customers returning, new faces appearing, small comments turning into real attention. Did you make this? One woman asked, holding up a pastry I had finished earlier that morning. I nodded, a little unsure. She smiled. It's really good. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just bowed my head slightly and said, thank you. It felt enough. Somewhere between the morning rush and the afternoon lull, I started to notice something else too. Daniel's presence wasn't just constant. It was careful, subtle, but intentional. When I forgot to eat, food would appear beside me. When I stood too long, a chair would quietly be pushed closer. When the heat from the ovens became too much, he would adjust the windows without saying anything. And when the dizziness came, sharp and sudden, the kind that made the edges of my vision blur, he was always there before I could fall. Sit. His hand was steady on my arm, firm enough to support, gentle enough not to startle. I'm fine, I said automatically, even as I felt the weakness in my own voice. You're not, he repeated, just as simply as before. This time, I didn't argue. I let him guide me to the chair, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table as I tried to steady myself. He didn't hover, didn't fuss, just placed a glass of water in front of me and stayed close enough that I knew, if I needed help, it would be there. That was how it always was. Quiet, unspoken, reliable. You should rest more, he said after a moment. I can't, I replied. We're busy. We were busy before you too. I glanced up at him, surprised. He met my gaze evenly. And we'll still be busy if you collapse. I let out a small breath, somewhere between a sigh and something softer. You're bad at comforting people. He shrugged slightly. I'm not trying to comfort you. I almost smiled. Almost. The days blended together after that. Work, small improvements, new recipes, new ideas. I started experimenting more, textures, flavors, presentation. Not just making something good, but something that felt intentional. Something that meant something. Try this, I said one afternoon, placing a newly finished pastry in front of Daniel. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Another experiment? Maybe. He took a bite, paused, then nodded once. This one will sell. That was how decisions were made between us. No long discussions. No unnecessary words. Just trust. And slowly, the shop began to change. Not just in volume, but in atmosphere. People stayed longer, talked more, laughed softly over coffee and pastries. And sometimes they watched, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but noticeable enough that I couldn't ignore it entirely. They're looking again, I muttered under my breath one afternoon. Daniel didn't even glance up. They're always looking. Why? He finally looked at me then, his expression unreadable but calm. Because you're good at what you do. I shook my head slightly. That's not it. I could feel it. The way their eyes moved between us. The quiet smiles. The whispered comments they thought we couldn't hear. Are you two together? Someone asked one day, bold enough to say it out loud. I froze for a fraction of a second. Just enough that I noticed it myself. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He simply handed over the order, calm as ever. Have a good day, he said instead. The customer laughed softly, not pushing further. But the question lingered in the air long after she left. I didn't bring it up. Neither did he. But something about it stayed with me longer than it should have. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. And that thought was both comforting and dangerous. That night, after closing, I stayed a little longer than usual. The shop was quiet again, just like the mornings, just like the moments I had started to look forward to. I stood behind the counter, looking at the trays, some empty, some with only a few pieces left. Proof of a day that had gone well. Better than I ever thought it would. My hand rested lightly against my stomach, almost without thinking. A small, unconscious gesture. We're going to be okay, I whispered, so softly it barely felt like sound at all. For the first time, I believed it. Not completely, not without fear, but enough. Enough to stand a little straighter. Enough to keep going. And somewhere in that quiet space, between who I used to be and who I was slowly becoming, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Something real. Something mine. 4 months can change a life in ways no one notices at first. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything became easier. But little by little, day after day, something inside me stopped breaking so easily. The nausea didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. The sharp dizziness that used to come without warning now faded faster, softer, like a storm that had learned to pass instead of destroy. The capsules Daniel gave me, small, almost unremarkable, made a difference I didn't question out loud. I only knew that breathing felt easier, sleeping felt deeper, and the hollow ache that used to sit beneath my ribs every time my body remembered what it was missing had quieted. Not gone, but quieter. Enough that I could stand longer, work longer, live a little more like myself again. The bakery changed too. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Reviews began to appear online. First a few, then dozens, then more than we could keep track of. The best pastries I've ever had. Everything here feels intentional. There's something special about this place. I didn't read them often, but sometimes, when Daniel wasn't looking, I would glance at the screen just long enough to see the words before looking away again. It still felt strange, being seen like that, being appreciated. The shop was full more often than not now. Mornings started earlier. Evenings ended later. Some days, we ran out before closing, the small sign hanging at the door, sold out. I used to feel guilty when that happened. Now it felt like proof. Proof that what I was doing mattered. That I mattered. And still, no matter how busy it got, I always set aside one box. Same time, same shelf, same quiet intention. Daniel noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You're saving it again," he said one evening, glancing at the neatly packed box I had placed to the side. I nodded. He comes every day, and if he doesn't? I hesitated for a moment. Then I'll wait. Daniel didn't ask anything else. He just nodded once and turned back to his work. That was enough. The day everything changed didn't feel special at first. It started like any other. Orders lined up. The soft hum of conversation filling the room. The scent of sugar and butter warm in the air. And then, the door opened. The man stepped in slowly, just like before. Clothes worn thin. Shoulders slightly hunched. The same quiet presence that made people uncomfortable before he even spoke. This time, the reaction came faster. Sharper. "Hey, watch it. Don't get too close." Does he even have money? The air shifted. Not subtly. Not gently. Judgment filled the space before he had a chance to say a word. I saw it happen. The way his hand tightened slightly. The way his eyes dropped. I stepped out from behind the counter before anyone else could say anything more. "Sir," I said, my voice steady, calm. "What would you like today?" He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. Like he didn't expect kindness to exist here. Not for someone like him. I wanted to buy a cake," he said slowly. "It's my daughter's birthday." The room didn't quiet completely, but it changed. Just enough that people were listening now. Watching. Waiting. "I don't have much," he added, his voice smaller this time. "Could you pick something for me?" I nodded. "Please have a seat." He hesitated, but he did. And I turned away, already knowing what I was going to make. When I came back, the box in my hands felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the cake, but because of what it meant. Soft pink frosting. Smooth edges. A small crown placed gently at the center. Tiny details shaped with care. The kind of cake a little girl would look at and smile, without hesitation. I placed it in front of him. He froze. I can't pay for that," he said immediately. "That's too much." I shook my head slightly. "It's okay." "No. I rested my hand lightly over the box, pushing it gently toward him. Then, without thinking, my other hand moved, settling briefly against my stomach. "I'm expecting a baby too," I said quietly. "So I just wanted to give this to her." He looked at me. Really looked. And something in his expression broke. Softly, quietly, but completely. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "Thank you." He left with the cake held carefully in both hands, like it was something fragile, something precious. The door closed behind him, and the bakery went silent. Not because anyone told them to be, but because something had shifted, something they couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't realize a camera had been recording. Not then. Not until later. The video spread faster than anything we had seen before. Across platforms. Across feeds. Across people who had never heard of us before. Comments poured in. Not just about the moment, but about everything. Who is he? That baker? This place looks unreal. They're both so beautiful. Photos of the pastries followed. Clips of the shop. Of Daniel. Of me. Of small moments people had captured without us noticing. Curiosity turned into attention. Attention turned into something bigger. The next morning, the line formed before we even opened. And it didn't stop. "We're sold out again," Daniel said that afternoon, flipping the sign with a quiet exhale. I leaned against the counter, tired, but not the kind of tired that broke me. The kind that meant something had been built. Something real. "We should make more," I said. He glanced at me. "Or you should rest more." I almost smiled. Almost. The days after blurred together. Long lines, constant movement, voices overlapping in a way that should have been overwhelming but somehow wasn't. Because underneath it all, there was something steady. Something familiar. Him. Always there. Always within reach. And yet, just when everything felt like it had settled into place, the past found its way back. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No warning. Just a message. A name I hadn't heard out loud in months, but had never truly stopped hearing in my own mind. Adrian Blake. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter as I read the words again. Engagement. Confirmed. With the daughter of a prominent family. The screen blurred for a moment. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Too well. I had told myself I was ready for this. That it was inevitable. That it didn't matter anymore. that I had moved on, built something, become something. But the truth didn't change just because I wanted it to. My chest tightened, sharp, sudden, familiar in a way I hated. Like something old had been waiting quietly, just for this moment. Elias. Daniel's voice cut through the noise, calm but closer than before. I hadn't noticed him step in. I didn't look up. Not immediately. I'm fine, I said, the words automatic, empty. He didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, you're not. The same words. The same tone. But this time, they landed differently. I exhaled slowly, the breath unsteady despite myself. It's nothing, I added, even though we both knew that wasn't true. Daniel didn't push. Didn't ask. He just stayed, close enough that I could feel it. That steady presence I had come to rely on more than I wanted to admit. You don't have to pretend, he said after a moment. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second, just enough to let the feeling pass through instead of fighting it. I thought I was past this, I said quietly. I thought it wouldn't hurt anymore. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, just listened. But it still does. I finished, my voice softer now, more honest than I meant it to be. There was a pause. Then his hand rested lightly on my shoulder, not heavy, not claiming. Just there. Then let it hurt, he said. I looked up at him then, surprised. What? You're allowed to feel it, he continued calmly. It doesn't erase everything you've built. My throat tightened slightly. Not painfully, just enough to remind me that I wasn't as stable as I thought I was. You're not that person anymore, he added. Even if he still is. I didn't answer, but for the first time since reading the message, I felt like I could breathe again. Not because the pain was gone, but because it wasn't all there was. And maybe that was enough. Growth never announces itself. It builds quietly, decision by decision, risk by risk, until one day you realize the ground beneath you has changed. The idea came on a night we closed early for the first time in weeks. Not because business was slow, but because we had nothing left to sell. We're turning people away every day, Daniel said, stacking the last tray into the rack. We can't keep doing that. I leaned against the counter, exhaustion settling into my bones in a way that felt earned. So what do we do? He didn't answer immediately. He rarely did. He thought first. Always. We expand, he said finally. The word hung in the air between us, simple, but heavy with everything it implied. More space, more staff, more responsibility, more risk. I exhaled slowly. We don't have enough capital. I know. That was it. No reassurance. No false optimism. Just truth. I nodded slightly, already understanding where his thoughts were going. Then we find someone who does. The next few days passed in a blur of numbers, plans, and quiet calculations. Costs, locations, possibilities. It was overwhelming, but not in the way it used to be. Not the kind that made me want to run. The kind that made me want to try. You're serious about this, I said one afternoon, watching Daniel review a list of potential sites. He glanced up briefly. So are you. I didn't deny it. Because he was right. For the first time, I wanted something more than just getting through the day. I wanted to build something that would last. A few days later, Daniel found me in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour. I found someone, he said. I paused. Someone. An investor. My heart skipped slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant. Already. He nodded. He's been following the shop for a while. Said he saw potential. I wiped my hands slowly, trying to steady the sudden rush of thoughts. Can we meet him? A small pause. Then, he prefers to stay anonymous. I frowned slightly. Anonymous. For now, Daniel clarified. He doesn't want to be involved publicly. That's unusual. Not necessarily. His tone remained calm, measured. He'll provide the capital. We handle everything else. I studied him for a moment, searching for something in his expression, but there was nothing to find. Just the same quiet steadiness. And you trust him? Daniel met my gaze evenly. I trust the opportunity. It wasn't a full answer, but it was enough. Because somewhere deep down, I trusted Daniel. More than I had expected to. More than I had planned to. Okay, I said finally. Then let's do it. Everything moved quickly after that. Faster than I thought possible. Papers. Agreements. Locations secured with a precision that felt almost too smooth. But I didn't question it. Not when everything was working. Not when every step forward felt like something we had earned. The second location opened within weeks. Then a third was already in development. What started as a small bakery became something else entirely. A name. A brand. Something people recognized before they even stepped inside. We're building a chain, I said one evening, looking at the plans spread across the table. The words felt unreal even as I said them. Daniel didn't look surprised. We are. I let out a quiet breath, my hand resting instinctively against my stomach again. It had become a habit now, a grounding point, a reminder of everything that mattered. Do you think, I hesitated, do you think we can handle this? He didn't hesitate. Yes. I glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. Why? He held my gaze for a moment. Because you can. Something in my chest tightened, not painfully, but deeply, like something was settling into place. And for a moment, I believed him completely. The day everything slowed down again came without warning. It started like any other. Work, movement, the steady rhythm I had come to rely on. And then, pain. Sharp, sudden, different. My breath caught, my hand gripping the edge of the counter as the world seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. Elias. Daniel was there immediately. Always. It's time. I managed, my voice unsteady despite my effort to control it. Everything after that blurred. Lights. Voices. Movement. The sterile brightness of a hospital room replacing the warmth of the bakery. Time didn't move normally anymore. It stretched, broke, reformed into something I couldn't track. The pain came in waves, strong, relentless, pulling me under before I could fully recover. Stay with me, someone said. I wasn't sure who. Maybe Daniel. Maybe a doctor. Maybe just a voice my mind created to keep me anchored. At some point, they told me it would have to be a C-section. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. Just that I was tired. So tired. And then nothing. Silence. Not empty. Just distant. Like the world had moved away from me. I floated somewhere between awareness and sleep, my body too heavy to move, my mind too quiet to think clearly. And in that stillness, I felt it. A presence. Familiar in a way that didn't make sense. Warm. Steady. My fingers twitched slightly, and then they were held. Gently. Carefully. Like something fragile. Like something that mattered. My breath caught, though I wasn't sure if it showed. I couldn't open my eyes. Couldn't speak. But I knew. I knew that touch. I knew that silence. You did well, a voice said softly. Low. Controlled. But not cold. Never cold to me. My chest tightened. Faintly, distantly, but enough. Enough that I felt it. A hand brushed lightly against my hair. Then my forehead. A kiss. Soft. Lingering just long enough to feel real. And then it was gone. The warmth. The presence. The quiet gravity that had filled the space around me. When I woke up, the room was bright again. Different. Real. The weight of my body returned slowly, sensation following in. Fragments instead of all at once. My eyes opened, adjusting to the light. Daniel was there, sitting beside the bed, just like he always was when I needed him. You're awake, he said. I swallowed, my throat dry. Yeah, my voice sounded distant. Not quite mine yet. I blinked slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that felt like they belonged to someone else. Was anyone here? I asked, the question leaving my lips before I could stop it. Daniel's expression didn't change. Just me. A pause. Then, and the doctor's. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting his words settle. Then I nodded slightly. Of course. It didn't make sense otherwise. I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling a soft breath. I think. I had a dream. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because even as the thought formed, I already knew that was the only explanation that fit. A dream. Just a dream. Something my mind created because it remembered too much and forgot too little. 3 years can turn a quiet beginning into something the world can no longer ignore. What started as a single small bakery had become a name, one people recognized before they even saw the storefront. Cities changed. States changed. But the lines outside didn't. They only grew longer. We're in 22 states now, Daniel said one morning, handing me the latest report. I skimmed through it, still not entirely used to seeing numbers like that attached to something I had built with my own hands. Revenue. Expansion. New locations already under construction. It still feels unreal, I admitted quietly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He just watched me for a moment, then said, "It won't for long." He was right. It didn't. Because the pace never slowed. If anything, it accelerated. New projects were already in motion. Not just bakeries anymore. Restaurants. Boutique hotels. Spaces that carried the same feeling as the first shop, but on a scale I would have never imagined before. And behind all of it, there was still him. The one person I had never met. My phone lit up softly against the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message. Him. Unknown. Always unknown. You're pushing too hard again. I stared at the screen for a second, a small smile forming before I could stop it. I'm fine. The reply came almost immediately. That's what you always say before you forget to eat. I exhaled quietly, leaning back in my chair. Daniel told you? I don't need him to. I didn't ask how. I had learned not to. There were things about him that didn't need explanations. Things I simply accepted, because somehow he was always right. The Chicago branch needs your approval on the final layout. I typed, shifting the conversation back to something safer. Work. Something I could control. Move the kitchen space 10% wider. Your design limits efficiency. I blinked slightly. You saw the draft? I see everything that matters. A pause. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment longer than usual. There it was again. That feeling. Like he was closer than he should be. Like the distance between us didn't exist in the same way it did with everyone else. You always know exactly what to fix, I typed slowly. Because I know how you think. My chest tightened slightly, not uncomfortably, but enough that I noticed it. We've never met, I replied. Does that matter? I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure. At some point, it had stopped mattering. He wasn't just an investor. Not really. He had become something else entirely. Someone I relied on in ways I hadn't planned. Someone who understood things I didn't say out loud. Someone who noticed when I was tired, when I was pushing too far, when I needed to stop, even when I didn't admit it myself. You should rest tonight. The next message came. No work after 8. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. You sound like Daniel. No, he replied. He sounds like me. I paused. Something about that line lingered longer than it should have. One day, I typed, slower this time. You'll have to meet me in person. There was a delay. Not long, but long enough that I noticed it. Not yet. Just 2 words. Familiar. Consistent. Always the same answer. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking it, setting the phone aside. I didn't understand it. Not completely, but I had stopped trying to force it. Because even without seeing him, I knew him. Or at least, it felt like I did. In quiet ways. In small details. The way he chose his words carefully, never wasting them. The way he corrected me without making me feel small. The way he listened, really listened, even through nothing but text. Sometimes, the conversations drifted beyond work. Small things at first, then more. Did you eat? What did you make today? Are you sleeping enough? And sometimes, things that stayed with me longer than they should have. You don't have to prove your worth anymore. I had read that message more than once. More than I wanted to admit. Because a part of me still wasn't sure how to believe it. And yet, when it came from him, it felt easier to try. You're smiling at your phone again. Daniel's voice cut in, calm but observant as always. I looked up, startled for a fraction of a second. I'm not. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You are. I set the phone down, clearing my throat softly. It's just work. Is it? His tone didn't accuse. It never did. But it didn't let things pass unnoticed either. I hesitated. Then, quietly, he's different. Daniel didn't respond right away. Just watched me. The way he always did when he was thinking about something more than he said. You trust him, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. I do. Another pause. Then, more than you trust me? The question caught me off guard. Not because of what it implied, but because Daniel rarely asked things like that. That's not fair, I said, softer than I intended. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then looked away first. I wasn't trying to be. The conversation ended there. Like most things between us. Left unfinished, but understood enough not to need more words. Outside of work, things had changed too. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The rumors had started months ago. Whispers. Assumptions. The way people looked at us, at me and Daniel, like they had already decided what we were to each other. You should just say yes already. A voice said one afternoon, light, teasing, but persistent. I glanced toward the source of the voice, and sighed quietly. No. The young alpha leaned casually against the counter, completely unfazed by the rejection. Again. You haven't even heard my full proposal today, he said, grinning like this was all part of a game he fully intended to win. Daniel didn't even look at him. No. The alpha placed a hand dramatically over his chest. That's cold. You'll survive. I might not, he replied, though the smile never left his face. You're rejecting me in front of your entire staff. You don't work here, Daniel said flatly. Details. I couldn't help it. A small laugh slipped out before I could stop it. The alpha turned toward me immediately, pointing like he had just won something important. See? He likes me. That's not what that was, I said, still smiling faintly. Daniel shook his head once, already turning back to his work. Leave. I'll come back tomorrow, the alpha said easily, completely unbothered as he pushed himself off the counter. You always do, Daniel replied without looking up. The door closed behind him, and the space settled again. Familiar. Calm. He's persistent, I said. He's annoying. I glanced at Daniel, the corner of my lips lifting slightly. You don't seem bothered. I am. He paused briefly, then added, quieter, just not for the reason he thinks. I didn't ask what he meant. Some things didn't need to be said out loud, and some things I wasn't ready to understand yet. My phone buzzed again. Another message. You laughed just now. I froze for a second. My fingers tightened slightly around the device. How do you know that? The reply came slowly this time. Because you sound different when you're not pretending. My breath caught, just for a moment. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough that I did. I didn't reply immediately, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if what I felt was curiosity, or something else entirely. Success doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it settles into your life so quietly that you only notice it when someone small tugs at your sleeve and pulls you back to what truly matters. Dad, I saw him again today. I looked up from my laptop, the tightness in my shoulders easing almost instantly at the sound of that voice. Light, bright, full of energy that never seemed to run out. I turned slightly in my chair, watching as my son climbed onto the couch with practiced ease, his small hands already animated as he spoke. The handsome uncle, he said seriously, as if this was a matter of great importance. I couldn't help. The faint smile that touched my lips. Again, he nodded quickly, eyes shining. He came to the park today. He played with me. He even bought me ice cream. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Did you say thank you? Of course I did. He replied immediately, almost offended that I would even ask. I'm not a baby. I laughed softly, setting my laptop aside. I know you're not. He shifted closer, resting lightly against me in a way that felt natural, familiar, safe. He's really nice, Dad, he added quieter this time. And strong too. He helped me when I fell. My hand moved instinctively, brushing gently through his hair. You fell. Only a little, he said quickly, waving it off. But he caught me. Something in my chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from something harder to name. And the babysitter was there the whole time? I asked carefully. He nodded. She saw everything. That eased something just enough. Still, the story wasn't new. The handsome uncle had been appearing in his stories for weeks now. Always the same. Always kind. Always there at just the right moment. It was strange. Not alarming. But noticeable. Next time, I said, adjusting his sleeve slightly, maybe Dad will come with you. His eyes lit up immediately. Really? If I can, I corrected gently. He didn't seem to mind the uncertainty. Then you'll like him too, he said with complete confidence. I smiled faintly, though my thoughts lingered longer than they should have. Because every time I tried to go with him, something came up. A meeting. A delay. A last-minute change that pulled me away just when I thought I had time. And somehow, I always missed him. The handsome uncle. Always just out of reach. Like a detail I couldn't quite catch no matter how closely I looked. You're thinking again. Daniel's voice cut in from the doorway, calm but knowing. I glanced up, exhaling softly. He mentioned that man again. Daniel didn't react immediately. The one at the park? Yes. A pause. Then, the babysitter is reliable. I nodded. I know. And I did. I had made sure of that myself. Carefully. Thoroughly. Still, it's just strange, I admitted. Daniel studied me for a moment, then said, simply, not everything needs to be explained right away. I looked at him, something about his tone catching my attention, but before I could ask, he spoke again. We're meeting him tomorrow. I blinked. What? The investor, he clarified. He agreed to meet. My heart skipped. Unexpected, sudden. Finally, Daniel nodded. He said it's time. Time. The word lingered. I wasn't sure why it felt heavier than it should have. He did ask me to tell you something, Daniel added. What? Stay calm. I frowned slightly. Why would I need to? He said. Daniel continued, cutting me off just slightly. Not to be too shocked. I let out a small breath, somewhere between confusion and something else I couldn't quite name. You're making this sound like a setup. Daniel didn't smile. Just be prepared. That night, I didn't sleep as easily as I had in months. Not because I was afraid, but because something felt like it was about to change. The next morning came faster than I expected. I chose my clothes more carefully than usual. Not overly formal, but precise, composed. The way I wanted to present myself, not just as a baker anymore, but as someone who had built something worth respecting. The car ride was quiet. Daniel didn't say much. Neither did I. The city outside shifted as we moved, familiar streets giving way to something more modern, more controlled. Glass, steel, clean lines that reflected a different kind of power. This is it, Daniel said finally. I stepped out of the car, my eyes lifting slowly toward the building in front of me. It wasn't just large. It was imposing. The kind of place that didn't need to prove its influence because it was already obvious. The name displayed at the entrance was unfamiliar, but the reputation wasn't. A rising force in artificial intelligence, research, development, the kind of company people talked about in terms of the future. He owns this. I asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer directly. He's involved. That didn't clarify anything. But I didn't press further. Not yet. Inside, everything felt precise. Controlled. Like every detail had been planned down to the smallest movement. We were led through corridors that seemed too quiet for a place this powerful. Too intentional. And then, she appeared. I stopped without meaning to. She was exactly how I remembered. Elegant. Composed. Untouchable in a way that made people step back without realizing it. Adrian's fiancée. The air shifted again, but this time, it wasn't the same kind of tension as before. It was quieter. Sharper. Something that cut deeper because it didn't need to be loud. She looked at me. Recognition flickered, brief, controlled, but there. It's been a while, she said, her voice smooth, perfectly measured. I felt my fingers tighten slightly at my side, but my expression didn't change. Yes, I replied calmly. It has. There were 1,000 things I could have said. Questions. Reactions. Emotions I thought I had already buried. But none of them mattered here. Not now. Because I wasn't that person anymore. I had built something of my own. And I wouldn't let the past define how I stood in this moment. He's expecting you, she said, stepping aside slightly. The door behind her remained closed. My heart beat once, harder than it should have. Not from fear. Just awareness. Of everything that had led to this point. Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to. Because this part wasn't his. My hand lifted slowly. Just for a second, I hesitated. Then I pushed the door open. The room inside was quiet. Large, but not overwhelming. Controlled. Like everything else in this place. And then, a figure stood near the window, back turned, the city stretching endlessly beyond him. Something in my chest tightened instantly. Sharp. Familiar. Wrong. Right. All at once. He turned. Slowly. Deliberately. And for a moment, time didn't move the way it should have. Because I knew that face. I had always known it. Even without seeing it for years. Even without allowing myself to remember. Hello, he said. His voice was calm. Controlled. But softer than anyone else would have noticed. Except me. Elias. Some meetings don't feel like reunions. They feel like everything you've been avoiding finally stepping into the same room as you. I didn't move. For a moment. Just a moment. I forgot how. Because the man standing in front of me wasn't a memory anymore. He was real. Close enough that I could see the details I had tried so hard to forget. The way his posture never wavered. The way his gaze held steady, like it always had. Like it never needed to search for me, because it had always known exactly where I was. Adrian Blake. My chest tightened, sharp and sudden, like something buried too deep had been pulled back to the surface all at once. Hello, Elias. His voice was the same. Controlled. Measured. And yet, softer than anyone else would have noticed. Except me. I forced myself to breathe. To step forward. To become the person I had spent years building. Someone who wouldn't break just because the past had finally caught up. Mr. Blake. I said calmly, my tone steady despite everything pressing against it. A flicker passed through his eyes. Small. Barely there. But I saw it. We don't need to be that formal, he replied. I didn't answer. Because I didn't trust myself to. Silence stretched between us. Not empty, but heavy with everything neither of us had said yet. So, I continued, forcing the words out before I could hesitate. You're the investor. He didn't deny it. Yes. One word. Simple. direct, like everything else about him. My fingers curled slightly at my side. Then thank you. The words felt strange in my mouth, but they were real. For everything you've done. The investment. The support. I held his gaze, steady, distant, controlled. But I think this is where we should stop. A pause. Not long, but enough that the air shifted. Stop, he repeated quietly. We shouldn't meet again, I said, each word placed carefully, deliberately. And we shouldn't keep in contact outside of work. His expression didn't change, but something in his presence did. Subtle, tighter. Why? The question was simple, but it wasn't casual. I exhaled slowly, my gaze lowering for just a fraction of a second before I forced it back up. I don't want to be the reason your marriage has problems. Silence. Then my marriage. His voice was quieter now, sharper. I nodded slightly. I just saw her outside. I didn't need to say her name. We both knew. For the first time since I walked into the room, something shifted clearly in his expression. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to disbelief. You know I was engaged to her, he said slowly, watching me closely. But you don't know that we called it off? My breath caught, just slightly. I hesitated. Then, honestly, I didn't know. The words felt heavier than they should have, because the truth behind them was heavier. After I heard about the engagement, I stopped following any news about you. I swallowed softly. I was busy. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at me. And then, quietly, no, I frowned slightly. What? You weren't just busy, he said. You were avoiding it. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Not harsh, not accusing, just accurate. I didn't deny it. Because I couldn't. Because he was right. You didn't want to see me marry someone else, he continued, his voice low but steady. My chest tightened again, this time deeper. More honest. I looked away first, just for a second, but it was enough. Silence settled between us again, but this time, it wasn't controlled. It was fragile. Elias. His voice softened, just slightly. I've never been married. I didn't look up. Not immediately. The engagement was a deal, he added. Nothing more. My fingers tightened faintly, my thoughts struggling to catch up with everything he was saying. Then why? I'll explain everything, he said, cutting in gently this time. But not all at once. I finally looked at him again. Really looked. And for the first time since stepping into the room, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not control, not distance, but something far more dangerous. I missed you, he said quietly. No hesitation. No calculation. Just truth. All these years. I never stopped. My breath caught again, this time harder. Adrian. My voice faltered just slightly. Enough that I noticed it. I don't. What about you? He asked, his gaze steady, unwavering. Do you still feel anything for me? Too many things collided at once. The past. The present. Everything I had built. Everything I had tried to leave behind. I don't know. I admitted finally, the honesty slipping out before I could stop it. There's too much, I exhaled softly. Too much I don't understand yet. He nodded once. Not disappointed. Not surprised. Like he had expected that answer all along. Then let me tell you, he said. And this time, I didn't stop him. The day I found out you were pregnant, he began, his voice calm but lower now, more personal. I had already made a decision. My heart skipped slightly. I was going to leave with you. The words hit harder than anything else he had said so far. I had everything planned, he continued. Where we would go, how we would disappear, how to keep you safe. I stared at him, my mind struggling to match that reality with the one I had lived through. Then something happened. His gaze shifted slightly, not away, but inward, like he was looking at something that hadn't left him either. A friend of mine, he said slowly. An alpha. He fell in love with a beta. My chest tightened slightly. The story already felt familiar, before he even finished it. His family didn't accept it, Adrian continued. So they ran. He paused. Just for a second. I thought they were brave. His voice didn't change, but something beneath it did. They weren't prepared. The words landed quietly, but heavily. His accounts were frozen. Every connection cut off. No one would hire him. They were followed. Threatened. I felt my breath slow without meaning to. He couldn't protect him, Adrian said finally. Not in that position. Silence. Then, so he went back, I said softly. Adrian nodded once. In exchange for his beta's safety. My chest tightened. Not painfully, but deeply, because I understood what that meant. After that, Adrian continued, his gaze returning to me. I realized something. His voice lowered slightly. I wasn't strong enough. The words didn't sound like an excuse. They sounded like a fact he had already accepted. Not to protect you, he added. Not to protect our child. My breath caught. So you. I couldn't finish it. But he did. So I let you go. Silence filled the space between us again. He didn't look away. Didn't soften it. I made it look like I gave up, he said. So they would stop looking at you. My fingers trembled slightly at my side. And you didn't tell me, I said quietly. Because if you knew, he replied just as quietly, you would have stayed. He was right. And we both knew it. I couldn't risk that. His voice steadied again. So I chose the only option that kept you alive. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second, trying to steady something inside me that didn't want to stay steady anymore. I'm sorry, he added softer now, for the 2 weeks you had to survive on your own. That hit differently. Not sharp, not sudden, just deep. Because he knew. Because he had always known. After that, he continued, I made sure you wouldn't fall again. My eyes opened slowly. Daniel, I said. Adrian nodded once. He's the beta my friend left behind. Everything clicked into place at once. Too cleanly. Too completely. You sent him to me. I asked him to stay with you. Adrian corrected quietly. My chest tightened again, but not the same way as before. This time, it wasn't just pain. And the rest, he said, his tone returning to something steadier. You already know. I did. The bakery. The growth. The opportunities that had come at exactly the right time. Too perfect to be coincidence. The engagement, he added after a moment, was just a delay tactic. I looked at him again. She's my friend, he said. We had an agreement. Nothing more. The room felt quieter now. Not because there was less to say, but because everything that needed to be said had finally been spoken. In the past 3 years, Adrian continued, I built everything I needed. His gaze didn't leave mine. A position. Power. Enough control that no one can touch what's mine. The words were calm. Controlled. But the meaning behind them wasn't. My breath slowed. Including you, he added, softer now. Not possession. Not demand. Just certainty. And for the first time since I walked into the room, I didn't know what to say next. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't knowing the truth, it's knowing what to do with it. I didn't realize how long I had been standing there until Adrian's voice faded into silence, and the weight of everything he had said finally settled inside me. Not like a storm, but like something slower, heavier, something that didn't break me all at once, but pressed in from every direction at the same time. And for the first time in years I felt unsteady, not because I was weak, but because everything I had built to survive suddenly had no place to stand anymore. Because the version of him I had forced myself to believe in, the one who left, the one who chose silence, the one who let me disappear, was gone, replaced by someone who had been there all along without me ever seeing him. And I didn't know if that made things easier or harder. Because if he had truly left me, I could hate him, I could move on, I could keep my world clean and simple. But now it wasn't simple anymore. Now it was complicated, messy, and painfully real. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening slightly at my side as I forced myself to meet his gaze again, steady even if everything inside me wasn't. I need time, I said quietly, the words coming out more honest than I expected, more fragile than I wanted them to be, but still mine. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. Adrian didn't interrupt, didn't step closer, didn't reach for me. And somehow, that restraint made everything feel even heavier. For almost 4 years, I continued, my voice steadier now. I've been living without you. I stopped looking for you. I stopped listening to anything about you. I told myself that was the only way I could keep going. I paused, swallowing softly. And it worked. A small, bitter smile touched my lips before fading just as quickly. I learned how to stand on my own. I built something real. I exhaled again. I learned how to forget you. Silence stretched between us, not empty, but full of everything those words didn't say. So now that you're standing here, I continued, quieter now, telling me you never left. I don't know how to fit that into the life I've already made. My gaze dropped for just a second before I forced it back up. I'm not saying no, I added quickly. But I'm not saying yes either. The honesty of it settled in the space between us like something fragile that neither of us wanted to break. Adrian nodded once, slowly, like he had already prepared himself for this answer long before I said it. Take all the time you need, he said, his voice calm, steady, and this time, softer in a way that didn't demand anything from me. I'm not going anywhere. And for some reason, that simple sentence hit harder than everything else he had said before. Because it wasn't a promise I had to believe in. It was one he had already proven. The conversation ended not with a resolution, but with something quieter, something more dangerous, possibility. And I turned before I could stay any longer, before I could let myself feel too much of it at once, because if I did, I wasn't sure I could keep holding everything together. The hallway outside felt cooler, quieter, like stepping out of one world into another, and I had barely taken a few steps when a familiar figure stepped into my path. She was standing there as if she had been waiting, composed, elegant, the same woman I had seen earlier, the one I thought was his future. My chest tightened instinctively, but this time, I didn't step back. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone calm but direct, leaving no room for avoidance. I hesitated for only a second before nodding. We moved to a quieter corner, away from the open space, away from eyes that didn't need to see this conversation, and she turned to face me fully, her gaze steady, observant, but not hostile, not the way I had expected. "I think there's something you misunderstood," she said first, without hesitation, her voice clear and composed. I didn't respond immediately, but she didn't seem to need me to. "Adrian and I," she continued, "were never what people thought we were." My fingers tightened slightly at my side. "We were friends," she said simply, "and later, business partners." She held my gaze, unwavering. Nothing more. The words landed quietly, but firmly enough that they couldn't be ignored. "The engagement was an arrangement," she added. "A way to buy time. For both of us." I blinked once, my thoughts struggling to catch up with everything I had just heard inside that room, and everything I was hearing now. "You should know," she continued, her tone softening just slightly. "I've seen what he's been doing these past few years." Something in her expression shifted, not into affection, but into something closer to respect. "There were days he worked almost nonstop," she said. 2, maybe 3 hours of sleep at most. My chest tightened again, sharper this time. "He built everything from nothing," she continued, "step by step, not just for himself." Her gaze didn't leave mine, but for the small family he was trying to protect. The words hit deeper than anything else she had said. "He never stopped looking for you," she added quietly, "even when he couldn't come close." I swallowed slowly, my throat suddenly tight. "And there's something else," she said after a brief pause, reaching into her bag before pulling something small out, not to hand it to me, but to show me. A photo, worn slightly at the edges, like it had been handled too many times to count. "He keeps this in his wallet," she said. My breath caught. It was a picture of me, of us. Old, faded, but unmistakable. Whenever he had time, she continued softly, he would look at it, just for a few seconds. Her gaze softened just slightly, like that was enough to keep him going. I couldn't look away. Not from the photo, not from the reality of it. "I'm telling you. This," she said finally, her tone returning to something steadier, "because I don't want you to misunderstand what we are." She met my gaze directly, and I don't want him to lose what he's been holding on to all this time, because of something that was never real to begin with. Silence followed her words, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything I hadn't allowed myself to see until now. I nodded slowly, my voice quieter when I finally spoke. "Thank you." She gave a small, almost relieved smile before stepping back, giving me space again, and this time when I walked away, it felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. By the time I returned to the office, my thoughts hadn't settled, but they weren't as chaotic anymore, and the first person I saw was Daniel, standing behind the counter like always, calm, steady, familiar in a way that had become part of my daily life without me even noticing when it happened. He looked up the moment I walked in, his expression shifting slightly, as if he could read something in my face before I even said a word. "You saw him," he said quietly. Not a question, a statement. I didn't bother denying it. "I saw him," I confirmed, my voice steady but softer than usual. A pause. Then, "And I know." Something flickered in his expression, something like acceptance, like he had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had without ever saying it out loud. "How much do you know?" he asked. I exhaled slowly. "Enough." Silence stretched between us before I added quietly. "You were sent by him." Daniel didn't look away, didn't hesitate. "Yes." One word. Simple. Honest. "From the beginning?" I asked. "From the beginning," he confirmed. My chest tightened, but this time, it wasn't anger. "You've been reporting to him." "I've been making sure you were okay," he corrected gently. I let out a small breath, somewhere between a sigh and something else I couldn't quite name. He asked about you almost every day, Daniel added after a moment. Even when he didn't have time to ask about anything else. My fingers curled slightly. The customer, I said quietly. The one who buys bread every day. Daniel nodded. Also him. A faint, almost incredulous sound escaped me. You noticed, didn't you? He added softly. He only ever bought the ones you made. My vision blurred slightly, just for a second. And the medicine, I said, my voice lower now, more fragile. That wasn't just something you had. Daniel shook his head slowly. It was from him. My breath hitched. He has a friend in research, Daniel continued. They found a way to extract and stabilize pheromones. I felt my heartbeat slow, and then spike again as he added quietly, but extracting it isn't easy. I didn't need him to explain further. Not when I could already see it. Feel it. Every time. I started, my voice breaking just slightly. Daniel nodded once. It hurts, he said simply. A lot. My eyes burned suddenly, without warning. He never told you, Daniel added. Because he didn't want you to hesitate using it. A tear slipped free before I could stop it. Then another. And another. I turned slightly, my hand coming up instinctively as if I could hide it, but there was nothing left to hide anymore. I thought. My voice faltered, the words barely holding together now. I thought I was alone. The confession came out quieter than anything I had said all day, but it was the most honest thing I had said in years. You weren't, Daniel replied gently. And somehow, that made everything hurt more, because it meant that all the loneliness I had forced myself to endure had never been real in the way I believed it was. Because he had been there. Always. Just out of reach. I closed my eyes briefly, my breath unsteady now, the walls I had built over years cracking in a way I couldn't stop anymore. I had spent so long convincing myself that I had been abandoned, that I had survived on my own, that I didn't need anyone, didn't need him. And now I was realizing that none of that had ever been the full truth. That every step I had taken forward, he had been there, making sure I didn't fall too far. That every opportunity one thought was luck had been him, quietly clearing the path ahead of me. That every moment I thought I was alone, he had been watching, waiting, enduring something I never saw. And suddenly, I didn't know which part hurt more. The past I had believed, or the truth I was only seeing now. My fingers tightened slightly against my sleeve as I slowly steadied my breathing, forcing myself to stand upright again, not as someone who had just been broken, but as someone who had finally understood something that had been hidden for far too long. I wiped the last tear away quietly, my gaze lowering for just a moment before lifting again, steadier now, clearer. Because this time, I knew what I needed to do. And this time, I wasn't running away anymore. Some love doesn't return all at once. It finds its way back quietly, like it never truly left. I stood there a few seconds before he arrived, my fingers loosely clasped in front of me, heart steady but no longer guarded the way it used to be. Because for the first time in years I wasn't running from what I felt. I wasn't trying to bury it or rename it into something safer. I was simply ready to face it, ready to choose it. And when Adrian stepped into view, stopping just a few steps away from me, everything felt strangely calm, not overwhelming, not chaotic, just right. He didn't speak first, and neither did I, because somehow both of us already knew why we were here, what this meeting meant, and after everything we had been through, words suddenly felt less important than the choice standing quietly between us. I took a slow breath, lifting my gaze to meet his fully this time, without hesitation, without distance. I thought about everything, I said softly, my voice steady, carrying more certainty than I expected, and I saw the slight shift in his eyes, not impatience, not expectation, just attention, like he was holding space for whatever I was about to say next. About the past, I continued. About what happened, and about everything you did that I didn't see. My fingers tightened slightly before relaxing again. And about us. A small pause, not from doubt, but from choosing my words carefully, honestly. I tried really hard to live without you, I admitted, a faint, almost self-aware smile touching my lips before fading gently. And I did. I looked at him, steady, open. But I never stopped loving you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, warm, like something long held finally settling into place, and for the first time, I saw something in Adrian's expression that he had never shown anyone else so openly before, something unguarded, something real. Even when I thought you left, I added quietly. Even when I told myself to forget you, it didn't change anything. My voice softened, but it didn't break. And now that I know the truth, I don't want to keep running from it anymore. I stepped closer, just one step, but it was enough to close the distance that had existed between us for years. Thank you, I said, looking up at him fully, for protecting us, even when I didn't understand it. His jaw tightened slightly, like he was holding something back, but this time I didn't let him. I reached forward, my hand finding his, and for a brief second I felt it. The same warmth, the same familiarity, but stronger now, steadier, like everything we had been through had carved something deeper instead of breaking it. I choose you, I said softly. That was all it took. The moment shattered quietly, not into chaos, but into something softer, something long overdue. And the next second I was pulled into his arms, firm and certain, his hold strong but careful, like he had waited years for this and still didn't want to rush a single second of it. I didn't resist. I didn't hesitate. I let myself sink into it completely, into the warmth, into the familiarity that had never truly faded. And as his arms tightened around me, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Peace. We didn't speak. Not at first. There was nothing we needed to say that this silence didn't already hold. And for what felt like an entire afternoon, we stayed like that, standing close, breathing in the same space, letting time move around us instead of against us. And somewhere in that quiet, I felt it clearly. He had changed, grown stronger, more grounded, and so had I. And maybe that was why we could finally stand here now, not as who we used to be, but as who we had become. When I finally pulled back slightly, my hand still resting lightly against his chest, I looked up at him, a small, softer smile forming. Do you want to meet him? I asked. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his answer. He nodded. We walked back together, side by side, not rushed, not uncertain, just together. And when the door opened and small footsteps echoed from inside, the moment shifted into something lighter, brighter. Dad, a small voice called out, full of excitement. And then the next second, it's the handsome man. My heart skipped as our son ran straight toward Adrian without hesitation, arms open, face lit up with pure joy. And before I could even process it, Adrian had already bent slightly. Catching him easily as the child clung to him like this had always been natural. I blinked, looking between them in disbelief before letting out a small laugh. So you've been sneaking around behind my back? I asked, raising a brow at Adrian. He didn't deny it. Instead, he gave a small, almost sheepish smile. I couldn't help it, he said quietly. I wanted to meet him, and I thought it would be easier if he didn't hate me later. My chest softened instantly at that. I crouched down slightly, meeting my son's bright, curious gaze. You like him that much? I asked gently. The boy nodded enthusiastically, arms still wrapped around Adrian's neck. He plays with me, and he buys me snacks, and he's really nice. I smiled, glancing briefly at Adrian before looking back at him. Then, would you like him to be your dad? The question came out softer than I expected, but it carried everything I couldn't put into longer words. The boy blinked, tilting his head slightly in confusion before answering with complete innocence. But you said my dad was dead. Time froze for exactly 1 second. Adrian slowly turned his head toward me. Dead? He repeated, one brow lifting. I froze, heat rushing to my face almost instantly. I didn't know what to say back then. I admitted awkwardly, avoiding his gaze. So I just said something random. There was a beat of silence. Then Adrian let out a quiet laugh, something rare, something warm, and before I could recover, he reached out, pulling both of us closer, his arm wrapping around us like we had always belonged there. And somehow that was it. Not dramatic, not loud, just complete. Life after that didn't become perfect, but it became ours, steady and real in a way that didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. And our son, as it turned out, adapted faster than either of us expected, quickly accepting that he had another dad, even if sometimes he and Adrian would end up bickering in the most ridiculous ways over who got more of my attention, their voices overlapping in playful arguments that filled the house with a kind of warmth I had once thought I would never have. And one quiet night, long after everything had settled, when the world outside had gone still, we lay together like we used to, close, comfortable, the distance of years no longer existing between us, our conversation flowing naturally, effortlessly, like it never stopped, because in some ways, it hadn't, not really. He's beautiful, Adrian said softly, his fingers tracing absent-minded circles along my arm. Just like you. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head slightly. That's because you didn't see him when he was just born, I teased. I thought I gave birth to a little monkey. Adrian went quiet for a second. Then, I did see him. I turned my head toward him, frowning slightly. What? His gaze softened, something deeper moving beneath it. I was there, he said quietly. I was the one who held his hand first. My breath caught. That day, he continued, his voice lower now, more intimate. You were still unconscious. Everything inside me stilled. You held my hand, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. And you kissed my forehead. He nodded once. Yes. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them, falling silently as the memory I had once dismissed as a dream came rushing back with painful clarity. It wasn't a dream, I whispered, my chest tightening. I thought I imagined it, because I was alone. My voice broke softly. Everyone else had someone with them, and I couldn't finish it. I didn't need to. Adrian pulled me closer instantly, his arms wrapping around me firmly, protectively, his voice low and steady against my hair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have been there properly. His hold tightened slightly. But I promise you, from now on, you'll never be alone again. I closed my eyes, leaning into him fully this time, letting myself believe it, not because I had to, but because now, I knew it was true, and in that moment, wrapped in the warmth of the life we had fought so hard to find again, everything finally felt the way it was always meant to be. Respect isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn, and once you have it, no one can take it away from you. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon, placed neatly on Ethan's desk by his assistant, the gold-embossed crest of the family he once called home catching the light like a memory he had long learned to live without. He didn't need to open it to know what it was, but he did anyway, his fingers calm, his heartbeat steady in a way it had never been years ago. And as his eyes scanned the formal wording requesting his presence at a board meeting of the Blackwell Group, there was no anger left in him, no bitterness, only a distant recognition of how far he had come since the day he walked away with nothing but a broken plan and a love he had chosen to protect from afar. Across the room, Evan was laughing softly as their son tugged at his sleeve, flour dust still clinging faintly to his shirt from a morning spent testing a new recipe, the sunlight catching in his hair, warm and real and present, and Ethan realized, not for the first time, that everything he had built, every sleepless night, every calculated move, had been worth it just to stand in a life where Evan could smile like that without fear. Is it from them? Evan asked gently, noticing the letter in his hand, and Ethan nodded, folding it once before setting it aside, his voice calm. They want me back. There was no tension in the room, no shadow of the past creeping in. Only a quiet understanding between them, the kind that came from years of distance, pain, and finally truth, and Evan didn't ask what he would do, because he already knew the answer would not come from fear anymore. The boardroom of Blackwell Group looked exactly as Ethan remembered, polished glass, controlled expressions, power-dressed in tailored suits, but something fundamental had shifted, not in the room, but in him, because when he walked in this time, he wasn't the son who needed approval. He wasn't the heir waiting to be chosen. He was a man who had built something of his own, something no one in that room had given him. The murmurs started the moment he entered, subtle, restrained, but unmistakable, eyes assessing, calculating, some curious, some uneasy, and at the head of the table, his father looked older than Ethan remembered, not weaker, but no longer untouchable. Ethan, the chairman began, his tone measured, we're glad you came. Ethan inclined his head slightly, taking a seat without waiting to be told, his posture relaxed but grounded, a quiet authority that didn't need to be announced. They spoke of numbers first, of falling shares, of failed expansions, of a successor who carried the name but not the weight of leadership, and Ethan listened without interruption, his fingers loosely interlaced, until finally the real request surfaced, careful but clear. We want you to return and take over operations. Silence settled over the room, thick with expectation, because once upon a time, this would have been everything he was raised to want, the position, the recognition, the power that came with the Blackwell name. But now, it felt like something smaller than what he already had. On what terms? Ethan asked calmly, his gaze steady, and there was a flicker of surprise, because he was not asking for permission, he was negotiating. His father leaned forward slightly. You'll have full authority as acting CEO. Ethan let a brief silence pass, just enough to make them feel the shift in control, before he spoke again, his voice even. Then let me be clear about mine. Every eye in the room fixed on him now, and Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't need to, because conviction carried further than volume. I will not return as someone who belongs to this family's expectations. I will return as a partner. My decisions will not be questioned based on personal matters, and no one in this room will interfere with my private life. A faint tension rippled through the board, because they all understood what he meant, even without names being spoken, and one of the senior members couldn't help but interject. You're referring to that Omega? The words were softer than before, less dismissive, but the undertone was still there, lingering from a past they hadn't fully outgrown, and Ethan turned his gaze to him, calm, unshaken. I'm referring to my family. The correction was gentle, but it landed harder than any confrontation, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then, almost as if testing him, another voice followed. You're asking us to accept him as part of this family? Ethan didn't hesitate. No, he said simply, and a few expressions shifted, misreading him, until he continued, his tone unchanged. I'm telling you that whether you accept him or not has nothing to do with me anymore. The silence that followed was different this time, not resistant, but reflective, because the power dynamic had already shifted, and everyone in that room could feel it. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze sweeping across the table, not in challenge, but in quiet certainty. You once told me he wasn't worthy, he said, not accusing, just stating a fact that no longer held weight. And now you're asking for my leadership, for my company to stabilize yours, for my strategies to rebuild what you couldn't maintain. He paused just long enough for the truth to settle in. So let's not confuse the situation. No anger, no raised voice, just clarity, and that made it impossible to dismiss. His father studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, something unspoken passing between them, something like reluctant acknowledgement. Your terms are accepted. And just like that, the past that once dictated everything lost its hold completely, not through rebellion, but through growth. When Ethan stepped out of the building, the sky seemed wider than it used to, the air lighter, and he didn't look back, because there was nothing left there that he needed to reclaim. That evening, back home, Evan was sitting on the couch with their son asleep against his shoulder, the quiet rhythm of their breathing filling the space, and Ethan paused at the doorway for a second, taking in the scene, grounding himself in what truly mattered, before walking in and pressing a soft kiss to Evan's hair. It's done, he murmured, and Evan looked up at him, eyes gentle. You didn't have to fight them, did you? Ethan smiled faintly. No, he said, I didn't. A week later, Daniel showed up at the bakery with a grin that was impossible to hide, a neatly designed invitation in his hand, and before he even said anything, Evan raised an eyebrow, already suspecting something. Why do you look like that? Daniel laughed, a little sheepish, a little proud. Because I'm getting married. The words hung in the air for a second before Evan broke into a wide smile, genuinely happy. You are? Daniel nodded, handing over the invitation. And you too are not allowed to say no. Ethan glanced at the card, then at Daniel, a hint of amusement in his eyes. To him? He asked, already knowing the answer, and Daniel rolled his eyes, but there was warmth there. Yes, to him. As if summoned by the mention, the door swung open again, and in walked the very alpha in question, taller than Daniel, energy a little too bright for the quiet bakery, but his eyes immediately softened the moment they landed on Daniel. I told you I'd come with you, he said, moving closer without hesitation, like distance wasn't something he believed in. Evan couldn't help the small laugh that escaped him, glancing between them. He followed you again? Daniel sighed, but there was no real annoyance in it anymore. He always does. The alpha grinned unapologetically. Of course I do. Ethan leaned slightly against the counter, watching them with quiet understanding, because there was something familiar in the way this played out, persistence, defiance, and something deeper underneath. Your family agreed? He asked, and for the first time, the alpha's expression turned serious, but not uncertain, just firm. They didn't, he said, then added with a small shrug, until they realized I wasn't asking. Daniel glanced at him, a subtle shift in his gaze, something like recognition of how far they had both come, and the alpha continued, almost casually. They wanted an heir, he said. I told them if they need one so badly, they can have another child themselves. Evan blinked, clearly caught off guard. You actually said that? The alpha nodded, completely unbothered. I only need one thing, he added, his hand finding Daniel's without hesitation. And it's not a title. There was a brief silence, not awkward, but full, and then Daniel cleared his throat, slightly flustered. Anyway, he said, trying to redirect. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Evan stepped forward, taking the invitation properly this time, his smile soft but bright. We'll be there, he said, and Ethan nodded beside him, his gaze steady. Of course. The alpha beamed like he had just won something far greater than approval, and Daniel shook his head, but he didn't let go of his hand. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet again, Evan leaned against Ethan, their son already asleep upstairs, the soft hum of a life that no longer needed to hide surrounding them. Everything turned out okay, he said softly, almost like he was still getting used to saying it out loud, and Ethan wrapped an arm around him, pulling him closer, his voice low but certain. It always was, he replied. We just had to get there. And for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left chasing them, nothing left to prove, only the quiet, steady kind of happiness that didn't need to be fought for anymore.